Yo, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to this week's episode of the Championship Corner. I got Dom Bradley from Mizzou Wrestling on. Pumped to have you on, man. I appreciate it. But before we even dive into things, dude, as we kick off, like, give me a wild story. Give me something funny. Give me something crazy. It could be youth league days. It could be college coaching days, competitive days. What you got for the people?
All right, I'll go for a funny story. When I was in high school, we were on an overseas trip. I went with my high school coaches and a couple other teammates, and went on a tour to Bulgaria and France. So we happened to be in France in 2006. And if you remember, the World Cup was going on in June around that time, June and
Uh,
July. And we were in Paris, France, downtown when France beat Brazil in the World Cup.
oh,
Um,
damn.
so the craziest thing I ever seen is we're in this hotel and people are throwing TVs out of the hotel, slamming on the ground. There's wine glasses getting thrown. I mean, it was the craziest thing I ever seen. And I remember being 17 years old and just running around with my shirt off, just running through the streets all night. I seen people flipping cars, and my high school coaches were there, and they're like, "Hey, we're not gonna tell your parents. Just go have fun." So we just ran around and just did crazy things. I mean, might even took a sip of wine from somebody just because I
Yeah,
was
for
like,
sure.
crazy, crazy.
Yeah.
So it was awesome.
Dude, it's one uh soccer's freaking wild, man.
Oh, yeah.
Like as I came across something earlier today, actually, it was just like influential people on like I think it was Instagram or whatever, and like the top three were like all soccer players around the world. It's
Yeah, I think they'd
freaking
get mad at
nuts.
overseas if we said soccer instead of football.
Football. Yeah. Well, cool, man. I'm pumped to like dive in. I guess like the first thing like that really stands out to me that like I really want to know is like how in the hell do you compete at a high level and coach at a high level and balance it? Like I think that's the biggest head scratcher to me because as I talk with college coaches all the time, I think college coaching in general is it's kind of wild, right? Like it's wild,
Yeah.
wild west a little bit. So, like, how do you manage both? I guess is the big question.
That's a very good question. I'm still trying to figure it out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think I'm just trying to always learn. And I think that's what we're all trying to do as adults. And I'm kind of a coach that I'm not gonna just say, hey, go do 10 burpees or something crazy. And I'm like,
Right.
I'm gonna do it with you. So a lot of times I wouldn't make my guys do something that I haven't done or I wouldn't do myself. So I'm probably pretty crazy in saying that. So I do it with them, and it's kind of just like fun for me. It's like, I'm gonna compete till the wheels fall off. I mean, I have like probably two or three tournaments left in my body.
Right.
Um, it's fun though. It's like I'm learning new techniques. I'm on a team with a great team, and I'm learning from guys like this kid named Keegan O'Toole is a two-time national champ, two-time world champ, and it's like he's like, "Hey, Coach Dom, can we work on this technique?" And I'm like, "Man, I never even learned these tricks." So now I'm doing them, and now I'm like, "Oh, maybe I can add to my wrestling." Or when I'm coaching, even when I'm coaching the little kids, like tonight, I just got done coaching, my son and my daughter at a practice. They're 7 and 6, and it's like I'm showing technique to 7 and 6 year olds. It's just I just think wrestling or sports in general, just being a coach, it's like you want the next generation to be better than you. You want to do something. I mean, wrestling is, like I said, I was in Paris, France when I was 17 years old. Like,
Right.
I never thought about that just from doing sports. I remember when I started wrestling when I was my kid's age, I was like, this is boring. But now I have a college degree, a master's degree, a coaching job. So it's great.
Yeah. Is there I guess windows where you have to give like maybe more attention to yourself versus obviously you guys are in the freaking heat of things right now. So is it a little more like attention towards the team and those guys and like how do you structure that out?
Yeah, so I'm really blessed with some of the coaches that we have on staff, like Kendrick Maple is my personal coach. I kind of just started this thing where I wanted to help my guy that I help a lot, my heavyweight Zach Elam. I wanted him to be the best. And I knew that me wrestling him every day, I've had more experience. Doesn't mean I'm better than him, but
Right.
just at the time right now, it's like I can help him noticing things by watching him as opposed to practicing with him. So I was like, well, I want to get a workout in too. So I came up with this new plan, and it actually has been working a lot. And we kind of do it with the guys who are trying to get ready for freestyle as well. Some couple other guys that stayed around and graduated. But I would practice the team. Let's say the team practices at 3:30. I would practice at 2, and I'd go to about 3:10, 3:15. I'd go downstairs, change my clothes, and then help run practice. And I just think this wrestling, and then I'm still in that mindset of trying to learn and still wrestling. And even if it's, weightlifting, even if the team's lifting, I'm still like, I'm going to help them with lifting or,
Yeah.
the conditioning stuff. So I think it's just certain times you have to be selfish as an athlete, but as a coach, you're just giving up all your time. You're helping anybody that wants to be helped. And I think that's the really hard part for me as a coach is like, I can't say no. I don't want to say no. I want everything
Yeah.
to be good. So it's tough, but like I said, there's just certain times where I block it out where I'm like, hey, Coach Dom's busy from 2 to 3:15. Anytime after that, I'm with you guys. So yeah, gotta
Yeah.
be smart sometimes.
Yeah. What would you say, like, as you've come on board, been full time, is obviously, like you said, is like nothing beats you being somebody's practice partner, right? Like you've had the experience, you've competed with the best of the best, you've been in the rooms, had great coaches, the whole nine. Like your career is, what's the piece of the puzzle, I guess, that you bring, like, I guess the best way to ask is like from a non-physical standpoint or a non-technical standpoint. It's like, what's that part where, I guess even if you said like, hey, like I'm a player's coach, like what does that actually mean? What are those pieces of the puzzle that like people really admire about you, I guess, on the team?
Um, I'm just gonna fight for my guys. I don't care if it's win, lose, or draw. And I sound just so cliche. And a lot of times I tell these guys, I'm like, hey, you deserve to win. And they're like, okay, yeah, I got it. But I'm like, no, we worked hard. And I'm like, please do me one thing before you go out there. And they go, what is that? I go, go have fun. And they go, what are you talking about? And I'm like wrestling or sports and going to college and being an athlete or even, being a Navy SEAL, all that stuff is so hard. But it's like, if you enjoy it, it kind of takes some of that hard stuff away and you get to really enjoy it. So I guess what I bring is like the positivity. Like, I don't ever want to be that coach where like, you see the coach on the sideline, like, why did you drop this pass? Or why'd you even mess up in this wrestling technique? And it's like, I don't want to be that coach. I don't ever want to
Right.
be that guy. I want to be the guy that's always positive. In my life, I've had people who coach me have been negative, and I just never responded to it. Funny story is my dad used to coach me like that, and I would just be like, "Yeah, man, I'm not listening to you." So my mom started coaching me. Believe it or not, my mom started coaching me, and I won so many tournaments with my mom in the corner, and she said, "I'm proud of you. Go do your best." That's all she said to me, and my wrestling went from here to here. I mean, I made a world team like 20 and under, and I was like 18. My mom was my coach, and everybody's like, "What are you doing? You're beating college kids, and you're still in high school." It's like, yeah, my mom just told me to go have fun. That's the only thing.
Wait, did she know wrestling? Like, was
Yeah, she
this
knew a
like,
little bit, but it was just like she's like, you know what you're doing. Like you've
yeah,
been doing it your whole life. It's like, everybody has to. I always say this to my guys. I'm like, even if you're wrestling the best guy or the worst guy, it's like everybody puts their shoes on the same way. Everybody has to put their straps on their singlet the same way. It's like we all have to do the same thing. So it's like just go have fun. It's too hard. Like if you start like thinking about all the hard stuff, you're like, man, I don't know if I want to do that. So it's tough.
yeah. I think it boils down to is, it's one of the things, like, as I like have conversations with other teams as well, it boils down to the question I always ask them, like, depending on what you want is trying your best enough. And I get different answers, and to me it boils down to, well, not really, because like trying your best is kind of vague, right? Like you may see their best as like their potential here, and they're like, well, like I tried my best. I'm like, I don't really
Hey.
know. Versus like, hey, if I want to be a national champ, or hey, I want to be an All-American, or like whatever the case may be, is okay, let's figure out what's required, and then let's just go do it and let the cards fall where they may. Versus, I think you have to, in some sense, enjoy the hard work of it. Like there has to be a beauty inside of that. And so I guess with your guys, is that a struggle? Like, do you have to, or do most of the guys coming in, do they enjoy that piece of the puzzle already? So,
You got to be crazy to even be a college wrestler. So you have to like hard work, but there's a different level if you want to be the best. I always hear this, and people always say there's levels to this, right? And,
right,
and there
right.
there's and not everybody's going to be a national champion or an all-American. Some people know that, and I respect those people so much. I have so many friends that were like, "Hey, man, I'm just here to wrestle because I like it, but I want to get a college degree." And I'm like, I totally get that. And there's kids on the team now that's like, it's like, "Hey, you got some really good guys that are special above you, so you're probably never going to get in the lineup. But how do you approach that? Like, what if this guy gets hurt and I get my one opportunity to wrestle a match? That's important, right?"
Yeah.
And that's the stuff that matters is like, and I say this to my guys all the time. I'm like, people don't remember you for results. They remember you for the person who you are, right? And I remember some of my best friends on the team in college. I don't know what they did in wrestling. They might have never won a match. I don't know. It was just kind of like, are you a good person? Are you treating me well? I met some people that are world champion wrestlers or Olympic medalists, and I'm like, that person's a terrible person. And that's what I tell my guys. I want you guys to be better people society. I want you guys to be great dads and great sons and brothers and husbands and all that stuff. That's what I care about. Um, so I guess when I say you're over, there's levels to it,
Hmm.
so many different layers of those levels. It's like, are you being the best person outside of wrestling? Are you being the best inside the wrestling? What are you doing in the classroom? What are you doing in your personal life? Like that's the stuff that really matters.
What are those, like, I guess, values or personality traits or characteristics for you personally that like have helped you continue to grow as the person, not necessarily the athlete? Because, like I said, is like you got to be freaking crazy enough to like want to do it and do it for the period of time that you've done it for. And so it's like, how have you continued to grow as that person? What are those like values and personality traits that like really, I guess, have stuck with you and that you continue to hone in on?
Um, Something that just really sticks to me is just, being humble. Like anytime I ever think like, man, I'm gonna win this tournament, like I'm gonna whoop everybody's butt, it's like then I get my butt kicked. And I think
Yeah.
it's just being humble. Like anything can happen at any moment. Like we just don't know. And it's just, when I work out, when I'm doing anything, I try to like do it to the fullest. And sometimes you can, and you have bad days, and it's just like do the best you can. Another thing is just be willing to learn from anybody. And I mean, I think when you're like 22 years old, you're like, screw that. I'm not doing that. Even when you're
Yeah.
20, it's like, and then at one point you just get humbled again, but just being willing to learn, like, reading and things like that. Stuff when I think in college when people are like, you should read a book. And I'm like, dude, I'm trying to be the best wrestler in the world and get a, you
Not
know,
reading a fucking book.
I'm not reading a book. I'm not going to class. I'm doing the bare minimum in class to stay eligible. And it's like now as I got older and I just went back to school last year and in a year I finished a master's program in a year. And it's like, man, what if I would have really read and applied myself like this and, shut off wrestling when I left the room and focused on reading and, doing things like that. Um,
Do you read
just
now?
I do read now. I don't read as much as
Uh-uh.
I want to, but
Yeah.
I have been reading.
What
So
do you enjoy? What do you enjoy? I'm a nerd. I'm a total book nerd. So I'm just curious.
I honestly, Coach Smith, our head coach, he has like a ginormous bookshelf in his office.
Library. Yeah.
Just like, hey, what book should I read? He's like, this one. And then there's one like I'm reading about leadership, and I'm reading a Jocko book right now about leadership and development. And I'm like, man, this is crazy. Like, what would I have done when I was 18 years old and I read this book going into college? What
Yeah.
would I have done? And
Well,
stuff like
timing
that.
is appropriate too.
Yeah,
It's
it
like
is.
how well would you have been able to receive it as an 18-year-old as well
Yeah.
too?
But this stuff like that, and I sometimes I read some stuff about sports and sometimes about history, but I'm still like I'm not the greatest like being consistent with it, so I'm really
Yeah.
trying to get good at it. I guess new year, new goal, new me,
Yeah.
right? That's my new thing. So try to read a little more.
Actually, I was going to kind of ask you is like a decent segue too, since I'm assuming the book's Extreme Ownership, the Jocko book that you've either started or like finished or whatever is for you. like what does leadership look like for you? Because it's one of those, like as I go in with teams, is I think one of the biggest hurdles for coaches and programs in general, actually just sports in general, is there's so many damn buzzwords and nobody knows what they means and nobody does like a good job of like actually defining them. And so it's like I'll have a kid come to me and they're like, well, like coach told me I need to be a better leader, but like I thought I was being a good leader. I'm like, well, like maybe you should ask them to define what leadership is, because like clearly your two definitions are off. So I'm just kind of curious. That was always one, as a coach, I'm always curious to get different perspectives on, what that looks like for you in terms of leadership as you develop men and develop a national caliber program as well.
Well, this is a good question. So some of the best leaders I ever been around when I was on a team or people who I looked up to when I was in college or when I was in high school, they led by example. So leading by example is just doing what you're supposed to do and then going beyond it. Like you said, is like here's what's required and they're going above it. And some leaders need to be vocal. And being a vocal leader, I guess, is kind of being bossy, but there's sometimes where you're like, I don't respect that guy. I'm not gonna listen to that guy.
Right.
But the guys that are kind of like, just hey, maybe we need to do this. But the guys who say something every once in a while, like, hey, pick it up. A leader doesn't have to necessarily be the best person on the team. There's people that are leaders that are just good. Like I can name so many kids that I've been on the team with that are people I wrestled with that were just great leaders, like in the classroom, like showing me how to study. And I'm like, why are you studying before wrestling practice? Well, I just want to, catch up. And I'm like, okay, but I'm like, this dude is never gonna be great at wrestling. But it's like now this guy is making so much money, it's doing great, and it's like, wow, okay, maybe that's what I should do. Or so I don't really know what a leader is. A leader is somebody who leads, but doesn't necessarily mean you have to be the best or you have to yell or when a lot of us think of leaders, we think of like captains and people who are responsible.
Hmm.
Um, captains messed up too. There's leaders that mess up too. So it's kind of just like who's ever willing to set the standard or make it even bring the program up.
Yeah. I definitely agree. And I think actually curious is like so many of the programs like that I've gone into, like at the college level, and I'm curious if this has happened inside your program since you've been around there. Is there's not always, but generally speaking, it's like, well, I can't say anything because I'm a freshman, right? Or like I can't say anything yet because like I haven't been an All-American yet. So like nobody's going to listen to me. But like you're saying, is like you don't have to be the best and you don't necessarily have to be a senior either to like earn your stripes to be able to say the things or to do what's required to show people or to raise the standard. I think one of the stories I'll give is one of the kids that I was working with off season went into their program and they had a conditioning test and like absolutely smoked it, like annihilated it. So much so is they like raised the times and like what it was to be able to pass. And everybody got pissed at her. And I was like, but like, okay, like that's a good thing, right? Like, yeah, like you didn't do the bare minimum. So I'm curious, like if that's kind of a thing with you guys too, where you have to step in and be like, bro, like dude, it's okay. Like, I get it. You've only been here 4 months. Like, you're a freshman, but like,
Yeah.
there, there is a time and a place for you to like use your voice.
Yeah, there's times when you have to use your voice. It doesn't matter if, like I said, if you're a starter, the worst guy on the team, the best guy. I mean, there's so many people that I respect that just have called me out on some bullshit, and it's just
Yeah. Yeah.
it's happened in the room. Sometimes you just need a guy to, hey man, that's bullshit. I don't care how good you are at wrestling, you can't cut corners or those things are going to catch up to you. And as I said, I wrestled at Missouri, so I already know the program standards, but
Yeah.
it's different. But it's like it's cool when I see kids and they ask me like, "What was it like when you were here?" And I was like,
Mm.
"This is how we did it," and then I kind of tell them, and they're like, "Oh, okay." So now they kind of carry on the tradition or they add things to it, which I absolutely love. And I kind of like to challenge some of the younger guys just to see what they would do. You're gonna take your lumps, but it's like dude, you're gonna be great, but maybe if you would do what this guy's doing. And, a great example yesterday, we had a freshman, I was working out with him yesterday. It was an optional practice. And I said, hey, the guy who's a 2-time national champ is here. And all the other guys who wrestled aren't here yesterday. Why is he here? There's maybe one other guy. And he's like,
Hmm.
he never misses a practice. And I go, make sure you remember that in 4 or 5 years. And he's like, oh, okay. And it really clicked with him. And he's like, I get it. Now it's like, we have this thing in our program, we call it one mores. And a one
Hmm.
more is just not just, maybe if I do one more rep, instead of it says 10 on the sheet, I do 11. Or, I stay after 5 minutes and work on something with the coach. Or I study for an extra 5 minutes. If I set for 20 and I was like, oh, I'll do 25. And if you do that 2 or 3, 4 times a week, or that stuff starts to add up. And that's just how the program was built. When I was growing up, Missouri wasn't a great program. And these are things that Coach Smith started to preach is, doing one more and expect to win
Hmm.
and compete. And I think if you just do all those things, you can't control the outcome. Like we all want to win, right? But you're going to lose. But if you do certain things right and you do everything right and you lose, you can look yourself in the mirror. But if you're not doing everything right and you lose, you're like, you don't want to look back 4 or 5 years later, like, man, what if I didn't cut that corner? What if I didn't do that? And yeah, I just think that's what a good leader or whatever. I don't know what a good leader is, but a good person. So yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting too, is I think because we're wired to find the easy way out, right? Like that's just like as human beings, is most people is um what is it? I think it's like a Goggins quote or something like that. Like when you think you've like reached your most, you're only at like 40%, like in your brain kind of type thing. And I think that that's the way, whatever the percentage is, I do agree with that, that at some level is like when you think you've done enough, that is the ceiling that like as good as you can be. And so yeah, it's very interesting because I'm sure that's a large role that like what you play as a leader for them is like, hey, good job, but like just so you know, like you're still just scratching the surface.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
you think this is good as you're going to be, but like I can see 2 years from now, I can see 1 month from now, I can see. And so I guess it's getting them to have that trust, have the connection with you to know it's like, okay, maybe I am only at 40%, maybe I am only at 50%,
Yeah.
to get them to like fully buy in, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. If you figure it out, let me know so I can show all the.
Yeah. Okay, got a since you were talking about coaching kids, I guess I don't know, personal question is uh biggest thing fatherhood's done for you.
It's giving me patience.
Oh man, me too.
It's so hard. That's like there's certain times I just get so mad. I'm like, dude, just do this. And they're just like, okay, what did you say? Like, and it's just you just have to be patient. And yeah, it's so rewarding when they do something right, but there's times where they're going to mess up. And it's the same as coaching, but it's like you have to give them lessons, right? And I think that's what sports has taught us and used in our life. So I know some people don't like sports, but I think it just relays messages. It's like I've learned how to be patient. Like, I don't want to just rush. Like you said, it's like I can see the future and I can see
Yeah.
something that's going to be great, but it's like, God, I just want it to happen now. Like, I just want you to be able to tie your shoes right away. And it's like, no,
Yeah.
we're going through all this. We got to do that. And it's really cool, but yeah, it's patience and just being, like I said, humble. It's like, they could do something great one day and they forget it the next day. And you're like, oh,
Right.
that's what happened. So, yeah,
Do
patience.
you That's interesting though. Do you see that like with your guys on the team? Because there's a lot of like athletes literally 2 days ago at a full day, like 7 conversations. And like the most common theme was is like at the end of the day, I was like had to send a message. I was like you guys just forgot how good you were. Like time
Yeah.
out. Let's back up. Like you're a freaking badass. Like there's a
Oh,
reason you're in the 1% of the 1% right now of like what you're doing and like competing at. So it's like time out. Like do you run into that too?
all the time. I try to tell these kids all the time. They're like, number one thing that people say, and it just irks me is I suck. And I'm like, what? Like, yeah, you might have did this wrong for a little bit, or yeah, you lost, but like in the big scheme of things, you're an athlete and you're competing at a sport where it's crazy. I don't care if you're wrestling NAIA or D2 or D3 or JUCO. It is hard. And you
Yeah,
don't suck if you're at a college and you're doing a sport. Like it's not like it's and no disrespect to club level sports that are just at school, like rec league. It's different, right? We're not just
it is
like
100%. Yeah.
we're
Let's
not
call a
getting
spade a
up and
spade. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and it's totally different. And they forget things. I'm like, don't I always remind kids, I'm like, what did you do to get here? Well, I worked hard. I did these extra workouts. I got up and I'm like, so where did we tell you not to do that? And they go,
Yeah.
uh, I don't know. I'm like, this is the hardest part about college athletics. And I know you know this too. And it's just time management. How do you manage your
Yeah.
time? And kids just have to learn that. And I think going back to being a father is something else I learned about is routines. And
Yeah.
routines are so key. And I'm 34 years old and I'm still like, all right, 9:30 comes around. I gotta make sure I'm kind of ready to go to bed. Not I'm not going to bed at the time, but I gotta get ready. Or
Yeah.
if I have a hard practice, like I need to drink a lot of water and just things like that. Or, my kids, they got to go to bed at this time. And same thing as an athlete. It's like, I like practice being at 3:30. I know what to do at 3:30. When it's not 3:30, I'm like, what do I do? Like, what can
Yeah.
I be? Why am I, what's on, I don't understand this stuff. Um, so yeah, routine is huge. And I think like these guys, they kind of forget what they're doing. It's like, hey, like do the things that you've been great at. They got you here. Now let's develop them and further advance them, and then good things will happen.
Yeah. It's like the young, especially wrestler, is like they go to their first big national tournament and they're like, "Hey, what do I eat after weigh-ins?" I'm like, "Well, like, what have you been eating for like the last 10 years?" They're like, "Peanut butter and jelly." I'm like, "Just eat a fucking peanut butter and jelly then."
Yeah,
Like, why are we having this
exactly.
conversation?
Exactly. So weird. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's amazing how, because I do love that in terms of like routines, because I think that that's what gives you confidence too, because you can add, um as a buddy once told me, he called them plus ones, right? You're basically like your deposits, and he was like, if I go to bed on time every night, that's a plus one for me, because
Yep.
the reality is the majority of the guys probably aren't going
Oh,
to bed
yeah.
every single night. So I know walking out the arena, the field, whatever it is I can bank that I have more plus ones than him, and it gives me the confidence, it gives me the swag, like whatever it is, to like believe in myself that I did more than that guy or individual competitor, like whoever it is. Um,
Facts.
yeah, yeah, very, 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 very interesting with that. What's your I, twofold question is what's your vision, like if I was a recruit, so to speak, like, and you were to paint the picture of like the vision of the program of like what, like where you want to take it and see it. And then I guess part B of that is like how's that evolved, especially since like you were competing there, and like how that's grown over the years.
Well, I just say with technology today, these kids are so much better at wrestling than me. Like they know more stuff than I do, which is crazy.
Yeah.
But I think as a coach, my vision and what when I'm talking to a recruit is I don't I necessarily don't ask them what their goals are. I just know what they want to do. And I'm like, what do you want to do? And they usually say, I want to be an Olympic champ. And I'm like, yeah, but what if you fell down tomorrow and you tear your ACL and you're done? What's your goals? Well, I want to be an accountant. So I kind of look at what, this sounds kind of crazy. I kind of look at what they want to major. And I kind of
Yeah.
that. And I'm like, okay, this kid wants to be successful at this. And then I start talking about wrestling. And when I talk about wrestling, you're going to take your lumps. It doesn't matter. And in even any sport, it's like, unless if you're some genetic freak where you're like, yeah, I'm good, but you always have to struggle. I always think this to me is you always got to struggle to shine. And that's what I
Yeah.
think. Like you have to go through these peaks and valleys. And then once you finally figure it out, you're going to shine. And then it's like, then you're going to go back down. And that's what like peaking and phasing. And that's where coaches have to be smart. And that's where coaches are doing is they're learning at peaking and phasing and all these different things. It's like this is time to train and this is time to taper and all these things. So I would try to tell these kids is you're gonna take your lumps, but I promise you, you're gonna get better. And there's gonna be times where you're gonna want to quit. And if you can push and break through those barriers, you're gonna get good. It goes back to that David Goggins thing you said.
Yeah,
I try
yeah.
to tell kids that. And then as the second part, I just, it's like I'm gonna push you, but I'm not gonna go out of my way to, seek you out and make you want to be great. If you want to be great, you're gonna find a coach.
Mm,
In every single successful person I've ever seen finds a coach. It doesn't
mm,
have to be the head coach. It doesn't have to be assist. It could be, I find somebody and you're like, hey, what do you do well? And I want to do that. And when you find a coach and you guys kind of make that connection and you guys have your routine and your things you want to do, that's when people go to different levels. But the guys who are kind of just like hang back and just do the bare minimum, like you said, they're not going to do anything. And I always tell kids this program was not built on people doing the bare minimum. And I tell every recruit, I'm like, hey, as a coach, I want you here because you're going to be good. But as alumni and a person to help build this program to what it is, you better freaking be ready to work hard and you better be able to run your head through the fucking wall if I tell you to.
yeah.
That's what I had to do. And there was people who said, I don't care if you're the top recruit. I don't care if you're number one in the country. You're gonna do all the things right. And you know what? I did. And at the end of the day, did I get the results I wanted? No. But I can really look myself in the mirror and said, I did every single thing right. I did what the program was expected and I did more. And that's what I try to tell these kids when I'm recruiting them or, try to sell a vision of the program.
Yeah, yeah. How was that? How's it evolved? And I guess like a better way maybe to language that too would be is like as you were coming in, what was the vision painted like for you? And yeah, because I'm sure however many years ago it's definitely like you said, I mean, even just the level of wrestling has changed, right? Like
Yeah.
just because kids know more, um, whether it's a good or a bad thing, they're spending more months out of the year on the mat probably than like previously.
Yeah.
I that's a whole nother rabbit hole, like sports specialization. I don't know if we want to go down, but like, I guess just how's that vision evolved? Like since you were a competitor there.
I wouldn't really say the vision has changed. It's just the success has finally came. And now it's like we want to maintain it. Like we don't want to just be, hey, we took seventh, okay,
Yeah.
which is great. Seventh place is great. Don't get me wrong. And I could just remember we took seventh, probably my freshman or sophomore year, and Coach Smith was like, "This is terrible. We need to do better." And I'm like, "What do you mean it's terrible? We had five All Americans took seventh place." And it's like, and then I started to think about it on the outside. I'm like, well, what if this guy would have won this match? Man, we could have took third. We could have had a trophy. And that's what I want these kids. And like, it sounds so crazy. It's like I'm not bitter, but I'm just like the staff that we have or like the things that these kids have. I just want them to realize like we didn't have that stuff and we were winning.
Yeah.
You guys are getting all these great things. So I think it's try to tell them that we didn't have the stuff that you guys have now, and now you have it. So let's see what else we can do. And it's not just like gear or whatever. It's just like
Mm.
the training, the specialized training. I'm like, I wish I would have trained like this. We would run 7 miles every Monday in preseason. Then we'd run a stadium every Wednesday. It's like, I don't think this team has ran on the track at Mizzou this year. This freshman class hasn't even ran on the track yet. And I'm like, dude, if whenever they decide to blow up the Hearn Center, Missouri, I am going to help turn up that track. I'll take a piece of it and just spit on it every day or something.
Yeah.
Just because I ran on that track so many times, and I guess that's what's changed is specialized training and things like that where it's like I'm 275, 80 pounds. I don't need to be running on a track. If I would have done that, I probably wouldn't have tendonitis in my knees right now. And guys are leaving the program better. You know, yes, there's going to be injuries, but there's less injuries like that. So I just think things like that have changed. But the vision is always like we want to be national champs, right? We're out
Yeah.
here chasing a freaking demon in Penn State who's on a dynasty right now. But that's what's fun. It's like I don't know what it's like to win and be perfect. I don't know what a perfect season is. Like I never had a
Yeah.
perfect season, and I always wanted one. And maybe the people who have it, great to them. But just me personally, like the loss, just man, it makes me work harder. I'd rather be the hunter than being hunted. You know, I want to go hunt people, right? I don't want to be the
Yeah.
and hunted. Like, yeah, it's cool. You're still good, but I want to be that guy that's like, oh, I'm going after him. I don't want to fight him off. I want to be chasing.
Yeah. 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 So have you, I mean, I guess like, do you guys, because you talk about like like specialized training and that way is, I think this is a little bit different. Maybe not, but I feel like this is a little bit different too. Is like nowadays, and when I say nowadays, this probably happened, I don't know, 5, 7, 8, 10 years, whenever it did, is even in sports, like more like smaller group type training, like you have your people and those are kind of your people. It doesn't mean the other coaches don't chime in. Versus, I don't know that that was as big a thing before. Like I think it was like train everybody, and that was kind of the way it is. Versus like, okay, like if you can give your attention to these like 8 guys, like I feel like they're gonna 2x because it's like you can really hone in on them. Is that kind of been the case like for you guys of like you kind of find your people?
Somewhat like in the wrestling room, it's kind of like we all do the same thing, but certain individuals like certain coaches and there's certain styles, which that's great. But I definitely think like in the weight room, I think stuff like that is just completely changed. I remember like we did football programs when I was in college in wrestling.
Yeah.
Dude, why are we benching and squatting and all this stuff? And now it's like, now there's lifting groups. Now there's 3 different groups. There's like like a functional group where they're trying to maintain their weight. So they're doing functional patterns and movements. And I actually moved over to that group, which is awesome and makes me feel
Yeah.
great. And I wish I would have had something like that. There's a group that, that needs to be lift strong and heavy. And that's what they've done their whole life and gain weight. There's that. And then there's a group that's kind of just like, hey, you're fine where you're at. And it's like, we didn't have that weightlifting training back.
Yeah.
We didn't have heart rate monitors. I'm wearing a Whoop right now, and I wear it when I wrestle. I wear it on my ankle. I've been wearing it for 4 or 5 years, and it's like, and now it keeps me in track with my workouts. And the days that I start to feel sick, I look at my Whoop and I'm like, oh man, stuff like that. Just specialized training and like, wrestling is, everybody's going to be different. Everybody's different in wrestling, but the weightlifting and the conditioning and all that stuff, nutrition is so important. And like when you are young in college, you're like, man, I can go out and drink a beer tonight. I can go out and eat this cheeseburger. Now
Yeah.
I'm like 29, 30. I'm 34 now, but when I was 29, I'm like, man, what if I eat this? And I'm like, shit, I'm doing good. I should keep doing this. Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. Why didn't I do that when I was 19?
What's the since you've been a coach, same question that I asked like with kids, but like we'll like phrase it in the coaching term. What's the biggest thing that like you've learned like as you stepped in? I mean, you're still a competitor, but like as you've really stepped into like the coaching role, what's kind of like the biggest thing that like you've learned from that?
Everybody is different.
Mm,
And it's no, I know there's sports like, football, there's offensive line, there's defense, there's tight end, there's receivers, basketball, but it's everybody's different. People have different things that make them click. Like, like a Keegan O'Toole, he's like, I want to be the greatest wrestler and I want to be the smartest guy in the business world. I'm like, oh, that's great. So that's how you can motivate him. There's just the other kid. It's like, man, I'm just here. And you're like, how do I get that person motivated? And how do I get them not just to focus on wrestling? How do I get them to focus on school and things like that?
hmm.
So everybody's different, and the way to motivate people is different. Yelling doesn't help. And I think that's something that I really learned is yelling does not work all the time. Yeah, there's times you need to get your ass chewed and yelled at, but yelling doesn't always help. And like at youth practice, it's like tonight I was like, hey, hurry up and get in here. And they're like, man, Coach Dom's mean. And I'm like, oh, okay, 5 push-ups. But at the end of the night, it's like, all right, now we're gonna play a game at the end of the practice. Like, oh yeah, Coach Dom's the best. So it's kind of just how you can motivate people differently is just it's so intriguing to me. And I guess that's what the hardest part is how do you motivate certain people and how do you get them to be the best versions of themselves? So yeah.
Yeah. That's so in my experience, and I'm wondering if this is like similar like with you two, is like a lot of times to me, the people that are like it's like pulling teeth to get them to do shit is they were never honest up front with themselves. So you can call it lack of clarity, you can call it lying, you can call it like whatever you want. But it was like, it's like I always tell everybody, it's like when I ask you a question, I'm like, real fucking careful what you tell me. Because
Yeah,
like if you say you want to be a national champ, or like if you say like whatever the thing is, right? Like you want to make a million, like whatever it is, I'm like, just be real careful because like I can only assume you're not a liar, right? Like, and so when you tell me that, like I take it as truth, I take it as facts. And so it's like that's how I treat you based off of what you tell me. And so a lot of times it's like when people are like, well, I just like I don't feel like doing this, or like whatever the thing is. And I'm just like, well, hold on, like time out, like, did you lie? Because like that's
yeah,
the
yeah,
logical answer to me. And so I'm curious if like if you kind of have to have those conversations with some of those individuals, because it's like at some level, like you should be pulled out of bed, right? Like I shouldn't have to come drag you out of bed every day. We all have our days. We all have our moments. I get that. But the vast majority is like you shouldn't be trying to willpower yourself to be a national champ or be an all-American or be the smartest in the business world or like start a business. It's like, right? Like it's like if you got married and you're like, hey, sweetie, I'm gonna start a business and like shit and nudge you out of bed every morning. That shit's probably not working out
yeah.
very
Oh no,
well.
no.
So I'm curious if like sometimes you have to have those conversations with the guys of like you're trying to like learn how to motivate them. It's like, well, first like time like were you honest? Because like that's step one. It's like you can't I always tell them it's like if you punch something in Google Maps, what's step one? And they're like, where you're going. I'm like, no, it has to know your current location. Like if you like it doesn't help you out. Like if you want
Hey, I'm
Chick-fil-A
stealing that.
and
I'm stealing that. That's a good one. That's a good one.
right,
I'm
like if you
stealing that.
want Chick-fil-A in Georgia or Chick-fil-A like on campus there and you give my Georgia address, like shit, that doesn't help you out at all. So I have to
No,
be honest about where I am right now. And so it's like I'm curious if like you have to like hammer home some of those conversations with the guys.
oh,
Um
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, today I just did that. I was like,
like
some guy said, I want to be the best. And it's like, all right, well, I'm not the starter. So, yeah, I'm not going to go to a competition of lower level divisions. It's like, man, screw you guys. Go freaking compete. Like I said, there's a tournament and they're like, hey, I don't want to go. There's D2 guys or D3 guys. And I'm like, hey, when I was in college, when I wasn't the starter, I went to that tournament 3 times. And they were like, what? And I'm like, yeah, I want to go compete. Like, I don't practice just to be, well, what is this like Kitty Powers, Eastbound and Down? I was like, I'm not trying to be the
yeah,
best at exercising. I'm trying to be, I'm like, dude, I'm trying to compete. I'm not trying to practice. If me, I would find any tournament I can so I don't have to practice as much. I'd rather
yeah,
compete and figure it out. And you do like, and sometimes some of those guys that you pull it out of them, like you're saying, that are kind of like, they're not being honest. But when they figure it out, you're like, holy shit.
yeah.
So yeah, that's the craziest part is like
And
you
it's
do
usually
that.
somebody with like insane fucking potential too.
Yeah,
It's usually one of those.
and you're like, dude, you have more talent in your pinky than I do in my whole body. Like, what are you
Yeah.
doing? When you figure this out, and the hardest part is, do they want to take the time to figure it out? And sometimes,
Yeah.
and then they come back and they're like 5 years later, like, yeah, I kind of see what you're saying. I'm coaching now, and I'm like, how'd you deal with me? And I'm like, well, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
And like, that's gonna happen back to you. So yeah.
Yeah. What are I guess from a like personality standpoint, like what are some of the things that like because obviously you're building the program to be a national championship team, right? So like there's a certain type or there's a certain level of like skill, talent, and abilities that like when I'm recruiting that I'm looking for, right? But I think from like as I was kind of asking you, like the values and stuff like that, like what are some of those characteristic traits like as you guys look out to continue to build the program from the non physical side again? Like what are some of those things like you guys like really seek out and look for?
We look for people who are great outside of the wrestling room, like you say, like the non-physical things, but we're looking for kids that are, doing great things in the classroom. Like, yeah, everybody wants good grades, but we really have a team where it's just like they're all pretty smart, and
Yeah.
smart people will find a way. And another thing we look for is people who are not afraid to ask questions.
Mm,
How do you find those kids who the people, the conversations, and with recruiting, I'm recruiting, and I always ask our head coach, he's been doing it forever. And I'm like, what's some things that you do? And he goes, there's certain questions in the way they ask. If they ask questions, I want the kid. And I'm like, holy cow, like I didn't even think about that. So now I remember asking questions when I was getting recruiting, but I'm like, wow, now it makes sense why I'm here. So
yeah.
it's things like the kids who want to ask questions, like, it's like, oh, hey, so we have this great facility, okay. Well, and then they're like, oh, okay. You're like, oh, well, this kid's not interested. But they're like, well, what do you have in the facility? What are you guys doing in practice? And stuff like that. When you tell them stuff like that, that's when they start asking questions. Those are the kids we want. They're people that always are seeking out to learn. And I think that goes back to having who people are smart. And not everybody has to be book smart. There's people who are smart outside of, school, but that's something that's really, really important is people who ask questions. Because closed mouths don't get fed, right? We all know
Yeah.
that. And you just sit there, like you said, and just do what you're told. Like, how do you get better? Why am I
Yeah.
why am I running 10 yards and stopping and waiting for my heartbeat to go back down and then I'm doing it again? I want to know why. So I always ask.
Hmm.
I'm 34 and I'm the weightlifting the kids do. I'm like, hey coach, why are they doing this lift? And he's like, well, this is why. And I'm like, oh, okay. That's what I want. And that's the kind of people that I want to be around. I want people who are going to ask questions. I don't want people who are just yes, man, or okay, why? How can I develop? Or what happens if I do this? That's always a great thing. What happens if I do this?
Man, that like I'm I'm trimming that, clipping that. Like that's because it's like one of the biggest things is in conversations that I've had with just high achievers in general, like one of the things that's always stood out to me is like I call it like being obnoxiously curious, right? And it's like the why of you're doing something to curious to how good they can actually be, like stopping and just like okay, I've never really thought about like what my real potential is. Or it's funny that you say that too. Is I was having a conversation, um freshman athlete kind of mentoring, and her assignment for this week is like you have to ask your coach a question. And then like she had texted me a couple days later, she's like, okay, like what am I supposed to ask? What am I supposed to ask Brad again? And I was like it doesn't matter, but I want to something that helps you, right? Like don't ask how many years have you been coaching? That doesn't help you out any, right? Like
Yes.
it can be any question in the world, but I want you to get used to, oh my gosh, yes, like learning to ask questions at a really young age, because I think that that is a lost art. Like I think, I mean, you can call it people struggle with connections and relationships and being face to face, and
Yeah,
people
yeah.
even ask me, it's like before I jump on podcasts, like my wife was like, do you know him? I was like, no. She's like, oh, like how are you gonna have a conversation? I'm like, I don't know, like just talk to people, like just shoot the shit, like whatever. I don't
Yeah.
know.
A lost art, man. This younger generation, they don't understand that. And I'm like, you got to talk to people.
Yeah, yeah. All right, last question. So I did not pre-frame you before we hit record on for this one, but it would be my last question for everybody is, if you could give one message, if you were in a stadium with 100,000 people and you could only leave them with one message, what message would you leave those people with?
Man, that's a good question. Mine would just be, man, that's probably something I already said, but it'd be just to make sure you're enjoying what you're doing because life is too short. And I love being with wrestling, but it's not who I am. And I don't want that to define me for who I am. So just have fun with whatever you're doing. Like, even if you're just relaxing, just make sure you're smiling. Like, A lot of times I think people say I have a resting bitch face, but I don't. I'm always thinking, I always have a question, but it's like,
Yeah.
what am I going to do to relax? Or what am I going to do for this? But then when I am happy, it's like, why are you smiling? Like people laugh at me. Like if you ever look at pictures of me wrestling, half the time I'm laughing or I'm smiling or, I'm just trying to have fun because it's, like I said, it's too damn hard not to have fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, just have fun and enjoy it because it can all be gone tomorrow, no matter what it is, if it's school, life, anything. So I think just have fun because I've seen people who are always depressed and I hear that and I'm not saying I don't understand it, but I can understand why people are, but it's just like I just try to enjoy everything I'm doing. Like I don't want to be sad about it. I don't want to be upset about it. I just, sometimes you gotta, like I said, you gotta struggle to shine.
Yeah. 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 And I think it goes back to being honest of doing the things that are actually meaningful to you. I think we get sucked into society or parents or peers or whoever it is. And then like, whether it be a job, whether it be a relationship, whether it be anything. And then they're just like, well, it's not that bad. Right. And so they just spend the next 40, 50 years of living well, it's not that bad kind of life. And I don't know, that sucks. That's just
Yeah.
not, I agree with you.
Yeah, probably not comparing yourself to others too. I think that's what the bad thing with social media is right now. So I love social media. I love getting on X or Twitter and just, reading stuff. Like I don't really say too much, but I like, seeing what people are doing or Instagram and stuff like that. But it's like then you compare yourself. You're like, well, this dude has this car and they have this, and it's like I don't care. Like I guess like it's cool, but when you're younger, that's what you care about. And it's like, man, just don't compare yourself to others. Have fun. It's
Yeah. Yeah. I always say too, is I had this conversation yesterday with a kiddo and because it's easy even if you're on a team, right? It's easy to compare yourself to your teammates, right? Like, well, like I'll never be there. And I'm like who's the greatest future version of you and what do they look like? And if you can define that, that's the only thing you ever compare yourself to. So it's like define your greatest future version self, and that's the only person that's the only gap you should ever look at because that's just the person you're striving to be. And so it's like if you can get really clear on like the person that you're striving to be, it's like just blinders on, go after that person.
yeah, have blinders. That's very good too. Yeah, I need that. Location and blinders. I'm taking that.
Location and blinders. Well, cool, man. I appreciate it. Best luck rest of the season and really enjoyed the conversation. And yeah, just keep leading from the front, brother, man.
All right, sounds good. Appreciate
All
you.
right. Peace.